5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi, I'm Ali Ewoldt. So I grew up about 45 minutes north of New York City in the small village of Pleasantville within the town of Mount Pleasant, which in fact was obnoxiously pleasant. A really sweet place to grow up. And I was introduced to Broadway musicals at a young age. I had an aunt who lived in Queens, and we would go and visit her, and she would lend us all of her golden age movie musicals like Carousel and Brigadoon. And so I listened to all of that. I was a huge Whitney Houston fan as a child. I think The Greatest Love of All was probably my favorite song ever. So there was also that influence in my household. My mom is Filipino, so we definitely had some traditional Filipino songs, and music was just very much a part of our lives. And we also, I would go and sing at church. That was one of my first jobs, was cantering at church. So I had all of that, sort of the classic Catholic hymns as well. Sure. So I think it was kind of a gradual, many faceted journey towards being a performer. I know that I was bouncing around the house as a child, and so my mom thought she should put me into dance class, which I absolutely loved. I don't remember the first time that I performed dancing, because I started at about 2.5, 3. But by all accounts, I was not terribly shy once I was on stage. I was a bit of a shy kid otherwise, but not once I was on stage. And then I was singing all over the house, and I would sing again for my family. My aunts, particularly my Tita Myrna, was very generous and would throw, loose change at me when I was performing for the family. And so I think maybe that was the first instance when I realized that, could I make money, 20 cents, singing for people, doing something that I loved. And then I did my very first professional show when I was 10 years old. I did a different version of Phantom of the Opera, just called Phantom, at the Westchester Broadway Theater. I played the, quote, little girl, which meant that I skipped around the stage in one scene and I ran from the chandelier in another, and otherwise mostly just kind of sat backstage and watched all of these professional performers working, and really fell in love with musical theater and what it was like to be backstage at a theater during that time. But then I also realized that, it was a very challenging business, and I wanted to focus on academics as well. And so when it came time to go to college, I actually decided to go to Yale University, where I was a psychology major in the undergrad liberal arts program, continuing to perform all the time, extracurricularly. But in some ways, I call it sort of my denial phase of when I was trying to find something else that I was similarly passionate about. Clearly, I failed.
Any Broadway shows? No. The arms are second, down.
Oh, goodness. So many. I mean,
2, 3, 4, 5,
may she rest in peace. Whitney Houston still has one of my favorite voices of all time. I just watched this amazing new sort of musical presentation about Nina Simone. Her voice is incredible. Billie Holiday. I love Lea Salonga's voice as she sings, musical theater, and was the Disney princess in Aladdin and Mulan, and she's Filipino, and so I totally grew up aspiring to be like her. Musical theater-wise, Kelly O'Hara and the late Barbara Cook had the most glorious soprano, and that's how I sing. And so I definitely aspire to sound like all of them. And the late Rebecca Luker was this incredible Broadway performer who I had the good fortune of working with, and I just think her voice is absolutely incredible. And then, of course, contemporarily, my cousin Grace has gotten me into Taylor Swift, so it's a little embarrassing, but I'm a Swiftie now. I actually didn't. I got a BA in psychology. So I think in a lot of ways it probably would have been useful to get a BFA in musical theater. I know that's what a lot of my colleagues have done. But I kind of went a different path, which meant that I didn't have a lot of formalized study in musical theater. But luckily I was able to continue to take voice lessons and kind of garner experience by performing, and sort of learned a bit on my feet. But I think that there are probably many things that would have been useful to me career-wise had I gotten a BFA.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I think I was always sort of drawn to getting to sing and to share that with people. I think now being a storyteller is really fulfilling for me to get to share experiences with other people by telling stories sometimes that are personal to me, sometimes that are different to me, and sort of the opportunity to create empathy and to create connections with my audience. I think that that's really amazing. But I think maybe when I was younger, I just thought it was fun. It was, getting to play pretend and to try on someone else's skin and see how it felt, and the freedom that comes with that as well. Yes, I absolutely maximize fun as much as possible, even though I played a lot of very serious roles. I played Christine in Phantom of the Opera for many years. I did Les Miserables, I did West Side Story, and those are very sort of heavy roles that require a lot of emotion. But I try to then offstage, have as much fun as possible with my cast members, connect with them. I was notorious when I was at Phantom for scaring one of my cast members, my friend J. Armstrong Johnson. I would hide in his clothing and pop out and scream at him and scare him. Because I think that, at the root of it, we have to stay loose and have fun and enjoy what we're doing. We are playing. And so finding those moments of joy and delight and being able to do that, within the context of the show, I think is so much fun. I just did a production of a musical called She Loves Me down in Arlington, Virginia, and my character got to do a lot of sort of wacky comedy things, but we also had a lot of fun backstage. We would give each other challenges, and one day one of my cast members came to me and said, okay, your character Amalia is a spy. And so I tried to figure out how to weave that in without disrupting the show and without letting the audience know that anything was happening, but kind of figured out how Amalia could be a spy, who she was spying on, when the moments were that she was being deceitful or projecting her emotions onto someone else. And it was so much fun. The entire cast got into it. And again, I don't think the audience had any idea that anything different was going on, but they could tell that we were engaged and we were connecting with each other and clearly enjoying what we were doing.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, I got to do West Side Story on a national tour all over the country and an international tour. I've also done a production of West Side Story in Mozambique and all over the country in regional productions. And I played the role of Maria all of those times. And what I find amazing about West Side Story, was the show that was written very specifically about gangs in New York. That the Puerto Rican gang and the white gang, and how they discriminated against each other and fought over very minor differences, and yet there was this beautiful love story between Maria and Tony that kind of overcame all of that. And I found that story has been so resonant all across borders and countries and cultures, and that people really kind of relate to this idea that we create these boundaries between us that don't really have any root in anything, and that that love and connection can have the ability to overcome those things. And then Phantom of the Opera, I got to be on Broadway for 2.5 years playing Christine Daae, who was a ballerina in the chorus and then got promoted to being an opera singer, and of course is taken down into the lair by the Phantom, involved in a love triangle. And that to me too was this amazing story at the root of it, of what it means to feel different, what it means to feel othered, and how we have the ability to sort of overcome those things. It's a sort of murder mystery and dark gothic love story, but I think at the heart of it, it's really about this character, Christine, feeling different and using those feelings to reach out to the Phantom and find a connection with him and find the humanity within him. Well, I never quite know. I wish I had found something else to do if I wasn't an actor or singer. But I do think that, I was a psychology major in college. I really related to it because, psychology is the study of why people behave the way they do, which in so many ways is what acting is, right? It's getting into someone else's skin and trying to understand how they operate. And so I do think that would be a path that would be of interest to me, either, as a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a social worker or something, connecting to people and sort of helping them through their challenges, trying to understand how they would operate. And I've sort of left that open as a possibility. Obviously, I would need some higher education degrees to really pursue that as a career someday. But I do think that it's something that I gravitate towards, is really trying to connect to people and understand why they behave the way they do. And so perhaps someday I will decide that I'm tired of the performing life and try and get a quote unquote normal job. It's really interesting because I grew up half Filipino, half white in a very, very white suburb of New York. And somehow I think because of my parents and because of the community that I was in, I felt very sheltered from a lot of discrimination that way. I think I was very connected to my Filipino side of the family, very proud to be Filipino on that end, but also very comfortable in white spaces. And it's been interesting because since I've been a performer, that's when I've been very, very aware of how we kind of get boxed into different categories. And I think I've been very fortunate in not being the recipient of a lot of hate or outward discrimination, but I am very connected to the community. Obviously, there have been terrible hate crimes against Asian Americans lately. There have been terrible hate crimes against many, many marginalized groups. And so I think that, part of being connected to my community is trying to speak out against those things, trying to, again, with even shows like West Side Story, understand why people get othered and then why people take their anger out on them. But it has been very interesting, being an Asian American performer and understanding that there are only so many roles that were written specifically for Asian actors, and that oftentimes the gatekeepers who decide who gets to do those are not Asian American or are not people of color and don't necessarily understand the communities. I remember when I auditioned for The King and I at Lincoln Center on Broadway, which was a show that I ultimately did. I was in the original company of that. The casting director that first saw me told my agents that we don't think she's Asian enough for this show. And of course, it was not an Asian person who was saying this, and who knows what, quote, Asian enough means for, a fictional musical set in Thailand. And ultimately, I was able to go back to my agent and say, this is a show that I feel very strongly about, that I feel that I connect to the material and I could perform the material well. Please help me, get in front of the creative team, in front of the director and the music director. And then if they say that I'm not appropriate for the show, then that's fine. And thankfully, my agents, were great advocates and were able to get me back into the room, and I was ultimately cast in it. But hearing things like, you are not quote unquote anything enough is totally ridiculous, and hopefully something that is changing as we continue to diversify our creative teams, the people behind the table, the people writing stories, and then hopefully we can continue to reach greater audiences, which then I think will do a lot to combat the sort of terrible racist discrimination that continues to happen in our world. Oh, I don't know. I love every show that I've gotten to do. I have to say, I loved doing Les Miserables. I did the national tour. It was one of my very first jobs out of college, and I was in the ensemble understudying the role of Cosette. And I got to play a, quote, bullet boy on the barricade, which basically meant that I was dressed up with like dirt all over my face and a unibrow, and I had, I was sort of handing out bullets to different people on the barricade. The show takes place in France during a student rebellion, and I got to be all sort of rough and tumble, and going back to playing. It was so much fun. We would create these whole worlds behind the scenes as long as we weren't distracting from the action that was going on up front. We were allowed to kind of I would go pick fights with the gang members and do all these sort of silly things that were wonderfully safe in that environment, but really different from the roles that I usually got to play. And then later on, I got to make my Broadway debut with Les Miserables playing Cosette, with a really amazing dream cast of people that I looked up to for many years, Norm Lewis and Daphne Rubin Vega, and later Lea Salonga, And so I think that that was a really, really wonderful formative experience where I both got to explore other aspects of what it is to be acting and really to, to get to make my dreams come true and perform on Broadway with it. What I hate most about my job is just the instability. It's really difficult, never quite knowing if I'm ever going to work again or what I'm doing next, or auditioning. I have to be honest, auditioning is not fun. I'm sure there are people that enjoy it, and there are tricks that we learn to try and enjoy it a little bit more. But just the idea of constantly being rejected is not delightful. So if I could work all the time and not have to audition, that would be a dream scenario. What I love the most is connecting with people. We have such amazing companies that form sometimes in a very short amount of time. People on stage and off stage, and the orchestra and backstage, and there's something really amazing about creating these communities and families and getting to support each other, and then going to see other shows and supporting those people. And I think theater people, because of the instability, are just are really awesome, and again, just that feeling of community is really wonderful. In Les Miserables. Yeah, it was wonderful. It was a bit terrifying. I think there's always, at least in my world, a fair amount of imposter syndrome, of the idea of, are they sure they want me? Am I allowed to be in this space? But it was a wonderfully diverse company. I was getting to play opposite my friend Adam Jacobs, who's a fellow half Filipino, and my mom was Daphne Rubin Vega, who's Latinx, and my dad was the wonderful Alex Gimignani, and Norm Lewis was playing Javert. It was just all of these amazing people that whose talents I had admired, and so I wanted to make sure that I was living up to that standard, and really doing a great job in that company. But it was really wonderful. I got to have friends and family come and see the show. And it was a learning experience too, of understanding, 8 times a week, how to balance that with life in New York City, with all of the other obligations I had, and to make sure that I was performing to the best of my ability. But I'm just very, very grateful for that opportunity. I loved playing Maria in West Side Story because she was so smart and strong and understood the world, I think, in a really beautiful way. I think what was wonderful about her character is that she really saw beyond boundaries and was able to reach out to Tony, to have this amazing love connection, but also to kind of be grounded in reality and to understand that the world around her had to change before her romance could be sustainable. But also, she had these moments of fun. I Feel Pretty was a delightful moment, trying to find the joy amidst all of the tragedy of that show, I think was a wonderful challenge. And the role itself, Maria's on stage for a long time. I did the national tour for a year. And that was, we would travel on our days off and 8 shows a week and all of that. And so it was also I felt a great responsibility to tell the story well, to take care of myself, to just go home and hydrate and sleep and not necessarily have as much fun as some of my other cast members were having outside of the show, because I wanted to make sure that I was available and ready in sort of body and mind and spirit for the task at hand. So it was a great challenge and very rewarding. Oh, I have many blooper stories. Let's see. My favorite story, which is very embarrassing. When I was doing The King and I on Broadway, I was in the ensemble and I was one of the wives, which meant that there's this scene in the second act where they are trying on these big Western hoop skirts. And my character fell down a bunch of times. But the way that it was situated, the hoop skirts were rigged so they would deploy over our heads. And there was this whole joke that we weren't wearing the appropriate undergarments, and Mrs. Anna was horrified, et cetera, et cetera. And one day we were performing and somehow I fell backwards. My skirt got stuck on the stage and I tipped over. They said it looked like a doll was falling backwards, and my skirt deployed completely over my head. And I was not wearing a lot underneath the skirt, and I was center stage and fell right on my butt. And the audience laughed because they thought it was on purpose at first. And then Ken Watanabe, who was playing the king, who's this very accomplished Japanese actor, didn't quite know what to say. And so he said, are you okay? And then, tried to help me up off the stage. And it was mortifying and also very funny. And a good reminder not to take ourselves too seriously, because we might, flash an entire audience on Broadway pulling out our butts. Thank you. It was such a pleasure. Thanks for chatting with me. Bye.
Okay, boys.
Thank you guys so much for joining me and Ali Ewoldt on another episode of the Uprise podcast. And I will update you guys on Instagram with more episodes to come. And yeah, have a good day. Thank you.